right there where we stripped it is 14.3. That's getting perilously close to being too wet. 14.9, 14.5,
That is so wild.
14.7,
Huh.
13.7, 14.1. So this is dry enough to paint on everyone that I tested, but I wouldn't try. Let's see all this mold and mildew that's coming because even the painted wood is too wet. Let's come around and yell.
Sorry, can't paint today. Next project.
Hey Bob, are you going to teach us how to do this?
Yeah, I'm gonna teach you how to take some factory painted aluminum and screw it on there. We're gonna. The first thing that I think we're gonna let's walk around this thing a little bit and see what we have. So we've got two different sections of the building, and not only does it have this here, the foundation is different, and we've got a hump going right up the middle.
Yeah.
So it looks to me like two structures married together, either moved together and or built behind the other one. And they did try to line up the clapboard, which is always a sign to me. This is failed caulk. It's also a failed foundation because it's closer down here. They sort of pull away this way. This is a great fix right here. Let's put a hunk of caulk in there. And this has got all kinds of nasty. Somebody put foam in here.
Foam is the answer.
Yeah.
This is not something that you could fix with epoxy because the hole goes all the way through the sheathing behind it.
So you do a splice.
There may not be any sheathing behind it. In a lot of these houses, it was just clapboard over stud, which is a bit odd to me. But and then they didn't use a lot of clear stuff. When you strip this down, you'll find knots all over the place. So right here, this is rot, but it's also got UV damage on it. So this gray is from UV damage. See, if I go like this, you can see the underlying, the underlying wood.
All the houses in Maine.
And paint will not stick to anything that's grayed. So UV damage is where you've got no paint on something. You can even see this in foyers where there's a window in a house on a hardwood floor where the finish is worn off and it gets gray. The finish will never stick to that. So you have to sand that gray off in order to get down the fresher wood like that, because otherwise it
So
just
is it
won't
an
go
oxidation? The same as it's the same
Yeah.
thing. UV damage oxidation.
Yeah,
You know
well,
what I'm saying?
some of it is,
Different.
but it's also UV light kills the cells on the surface of the wood somehow. Wood is not alive, but you know, it's
Good use of siding, right?
yeah. So this corner board is kind of problematic. A lot of this siding, you know, it's interesting because I just can't believe that this is original. First of all, up in the gable, we don't have signs like this. I would presume that this siding up there is probably more original than down here. Usually people couldn't, you know, as easily get up there and change it
That
out.
it's a little bit shielded by the weather. But
Right, so that's the same kind of
Yeah.
siding that we
So-
brought along.
Yeah.
But you know, having a knife is a great thing because it's a pro. So we've got a problem here.
Is that even a piece of siding there?
Right.
No, it's not. It's
One
just
is-
barnwood or
It's a
something.
piece of treated wood.
Yeah.
But the underlying here is okay. So, you know, this piece is toast. We've got up in the upper gable, we've got the smooth, plain face clapboard. And then we've got all, you know, a whole mix of different things here.
Yeah.
This was underwater though. Several times.
Oh, that is true. I didn't think about that.
And this is always just flummoxes the hell out of me. So, and we see this all over Hannibal. I see it all over the country, where they had a wood floor and they come in and they pour the gigantic
They
monolithic
did that at the
concrete.
schoolhouse.
You know, I just don't get it.
Yeah.
But they did it. I mean, can you imagine trying to jackhammer this on here?
Yeah, I thought of that.
Now, I don't know whether it's hollow in the middle, but it sure looks pretty solid to me.
Bob, one thing I probably should have mentioned to you is that
I
Probably from about 10 foot down, this house has been underwater a couple times.
So they probably did replace it. All right, so I think this is a good place. I think that we'll do some replacement of clapboard up here because it was supposed to rain like hell all afternoon, right? But I think it's a good place to do it anyway. So what we're looking at here is we've got a piece that's cracked here, and it's sucked in because of the crack. So it's like this. I think this is a good one to replace. So what I like to do when I do this, we're going to replace that piece. We're going to replace this piece. And let's see what else we do. Over here. So look at this paint.
How many years you think?
I don't know. How many layers you think are in that? Enough. Right. And I think we'll replace this piece.
Why?
Because it's got a big old crack in it and it's not sawn, and what we have will match that.
Okay.
So that's the reason. Now, on cracks like this,
Okay.
we can actually dig that out a little bit, which we'll do.
Phil?
But we don't use regular copper. We use bathroom, sanded or unsanded caulk. It's made by Mapei. That makes all the different tile grouts and thin set mortars. It's an acrylic latex, so it's paintable. And the problem with using like Alex Plus or any of the better 30, 40 year acrylic latex caulks with a little bit of silicone in them for flexibility is that they're so shiny, and the finish of the wood is not. So I brought some of that caulk so that we can use a little bit of it. We'll get going on that. I want to do a little epoxy repair on the other side. We're going to go and I'm going to show you how to mix epoxy, and we're got a couple of spots over here I want to fill. So epoxy has to go on wood that has no paint on it. So we need to do a little prep. This is a big old knot hole, and moisture's going to get in here and rot this away. So we need to scrape this off down to the bare wood, and I'm going to let somebody do that. Mist it with a little bit of water. Who's going to do it? I'll pick if you don't step up. I do that a lot, don't I? There you go. So you're going to scrape the wood away in about that circle. So I get these from Big Lots. We use them to mix different epoxies and all kinds of things. So this is the liquid, and we have A and B here. And I don't remember which is A and which is B, but they're different colors. So it comes in a big gallon can, and so I get these at Sally's Beauty Supply, and they love it when I come in. They're like, "You're the only gay guy that's not gay that comes in here and buys things." So these are graduated bottles, so I can see in between the numbers. So I'm going to put about a half of an ounce of A here, because we aren't going to need a lot.
That's a great idea, actually.
And I'm going to put, you can squirt this out. Actually, some people like the squirt bottles because you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then take the other one and go 1, 2, 3, 4. But I like the accuracy of this.
That's different from this wood epoxy stuff?
This is the wood epoxy stuff.
Okay, thank you.
So it's almost like the primer.
Thank you, good question.
You want to get the right bit back on.
You do.
That's right.
Because if you mix A and B, you're in trouble.
Good.
Yeah, it's all true. All right, so I like to put on, where are they? Women always complain because I don't get the extra large ones, I get the large ones. So come on up. because I'm going to have you mixing some stuff. So A and B combine, and there's a chemical reaction between the two. So the molecules of A and B combine, and the chemical reaction creates heat, which then in turn helps cure the epoxy. So you've got equal parts of A and B, and you mix this until it gets nice and cloudy and a little bubbly. You cannot use the putty without the liquid, so think of it as a primer. And it reconditions the rotted wood and makes it so that it's not all soft and gooey, which is really important. Okay, so come on over here. Now, there's a bunch of loose stuff in there, and I'm just going to go like that, and that's it. Because this will reconsolidate all the loose stuff. Soak it in all inside this knot. What's important about this is that you put it on, you soak it in, and then you go off to the next piece, and then you come back to it. And if it's starting to look dry, you add more until it stays wet. That's important. Then you know you've saturated everything that needs to be saturated. So now if somebody else wants to come and
Clean up my drill.
scrape this one here, and then we're going to scrape, this is a big gouge. We need to scrape this down, and we'll put the epoxy over there. It's got a life of about 25-30
We
minutes.
can use the rest.
So, you gonna do this one or this one? There you go. I'm big on this misting thing because I don't want to suck up
Red
lead
dust.
fumes. Red dust. Now you have to dig into that. See all that green?
Yeah.
We want that gone. So you kind of have to turn it into itself. Yeah, so like this. And listen, everybody, the rougher it is, the better. It likes roughness, but it doesn't like that old gray, and it doesn't like this old moldy. We got two spots here that also have an old rusted nail that was in there. I'm gonna get in there deep as we can, get the rest of that, all that black off of there. And then somebody can grab the liquid and just follow him right over there. And then somebody else can scrape that other one by the pipe, and we'll get that going, okay? And if you have like a little worn spot on a piece of wood, the epoxy won't work unless you rough it up.
What would you use, like on a?
It's like creating keys for like plaster. How it squeezes through, and if it's rough, then the epoxy adheres better.
Like on the outside, under the sill window.
Uh-huh.
Like my building, the bottom is limestone. Then they're wood, and they're cracked.
That's called grain checking.
Right. What
Right.
would you do for that?
So we take a utility knife and we cut out the grain checks, and it dovetails that.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And then we can put liquid in there and then fill it a little proud of the surface, sand it off, because those are high water penetration points.
Okay, it's terrible.
And so, and grain checking isn't rock. Right. It's just, the way things drag and expand and that kind of thing. So you get down as deep into the grain check as you can, get it out with a utility knife. Also, another good tool for doing that is a cement board cutter. They've got a real sharp edge, and you can get into those nicely with those. And they got a handle on them and stuff.
Yeah, it's got
Yeah.
We're just going to fill that hole, so you just need to make sure the paint's off around it, right?
And then, are you gonna put this over the?
Yeah, go ahead and coat that. Yeah. So feel it with your hand first, so you get a sense of how it's depressed, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now he's roughed it up.
It's kind of like right.
All right. So you're gonna put the liquid in here, right on.
Too much.
So you can't wear the same gloves when you mix the putty,
Oh.
because you're not sure whether you had A or B on what hand or what have you, right?
I don't want to stand
If you
Yeah, this is blowing a hat in my nose.
If you put the lids back on this tight, this has a shelf life of 3 or 4 years. If you don't put the lids back on tight, it can be gone in a month. So it's very important. When Avatron first came out with this, they had these crappy little tubs. Now they have one of the best locking lids on them with a rubber gasket and the whole works. To the point where sometimes, for some people, that actually have fingernails. It's hard to get them all. Now that is B. And this is A. And you can always tell when students have been doing this because this one's not bad. There's a little more out of this one than this one, which is a problem, right? Because, I mean, the 50-50 mix, you can be 5% one way or the other without affecting. But if you get more than that, if you got a ball this big and a ball this big, put them together, it's not going to cure properly, which is an issue. All right, and you want to make sure that you remember what lid goes where. Right? The good news is there's some of the white on here, and you don't want to. You want to put your gloves back on. God, I feel like I'm at the airport. So I'm going to take some out of here. Take some out of here. You cannot reach this hand into here because when they two touch, it starts a chemical reaction, right? So.
Oh no, Mr. B.
That's about right. It's like Play-Doh time, right?
A certain age.
All right, so I want these two balls to be very similar in size. I'm very happy with how those look. They're really close. So then you don't have to clap. Wait till the end. And then I knead it and push it in with my thumb. And it can't be mottled. It has to be one consistent color. And that's really important because it's not thoroughly mixed until you get it to that point. And I knead it and I fold it and I push it in with my thumb. And it can't be mottled. So now we're all ready, right?
Not quite.
No?
Keep working.
This isn't good? All right, I'll keep going.
How long have you got to play with?
Well, you got
Oh, cure
about
time.
30 minutes
30 minutes.
at the most, and it starts to get stiff, right? Put on some gloves because you're going to be putting this in. You want to feel how creamy this is. It's unbelievable, wonderful product, but it gets stiffer as time goes on. So 15 minutes, it starts to get stiff. Avery, what's been your experience when it starts to stiffen up to the point where it's hard to put it in?
Right around 50.
Yeah. He's gotten really good with epoxy. So, mixing it is really important. And this is close, but it's still mottled a little bit. So I'm going to keep mixing it.
See, the spindle that you showed us yesterday,
Yeah.
that had epoxy,
Yeah.
you had, you drilled the holes through the epoxy.
So if you've got
so
something
that-
you're putting epoxy on that's at the bottom of a column, the bottom of a spindle, the bottom of a sill or what have you, if you've got epoxy at the bottom of that element, you need to drill some little weep holes up through the epoxy
To the wood.
into the good wood above, so that if moisture settles in above the patch, it breathes like wood, but it's not exactly wood.
At least it
So-
can get out.
So the only failures we've ever seen, and we stopped them cold, was when we did bottom patches and we didn't do that. And now we know that we have to. So on a column, used to be people would do a little patching in place. I don't do that anymore. We take it out and we put it on a bench and we put the epoxy in and then we drill the holes and put it back in because you can't get underneath the plinth block on a column to drill up through it. So once I think I have this mixed, then I mix it some more. Because there's no sense in not having it be completely and thoroughly mixed in so that there's no mottling. All right, who wants to try to, who did the knot? You did it. All right. Now, here's the key to this. Especially on areas like this. You want to take this, a bit of it, and smear it, a thin layer into it. So that gives you a base, and then you build it up so it's proud of the surface. See, I'm going to do this one. So I'm going to smear this on here like this. Try to smear it in the hole a little bit too. And this is concaved in like this. So now I'm going to take this, and I'm going to put this on here like this. And we're going to fast cure this. Avery's going to stand here with a heat gun on this for a few minutes, for a little while actually. and fast cure it. You can fast cure it with a heat gun. It's the only thing I use heat guns for now, is fast curing epoxy. And if you want to make sure you're getting it proud of the surface, that means higher than the surface where you want it to be after you shave it and finish it off, you can take a straight edge and put it over there, and that's one way to do it. And I want to make sure I'm really working it into that hole.
Once you've applied the liquid stuff, do you have any kind of open time before you come back and mix this putty part?
No,
and apply
it can go immediately.
And what about
Because the
like
liquid,
alcohol?
and the A and B, and the liquid and the A and B and the putty are the same chemical makeup, and they help each other cure.
What about waiting until tomorrow? Is that
That's
not
no
a good
problem.
idea?
You can wait. Yeah. So then I try to feather my edges out a little bit.
Is it stainable also?
Yes, you can also, a little bit. But you can buy dyes from Abatron, powder dyes. I think they're anilines. I'm not sure exactly what they are. But they've developed that you could add to it when you're kneading it.
Oh, okay, to get the right color
Right,
before.
right.
There's not a problem with having a thick glob of it in that hole?
Not at all. In fact, the thicker it is, the faster it cures, and the more thoroughly it cures.
Can you see
Oh,
Right.
that's why.
Yep.
Yes.
You're leaving it proud?
I am. Yeah, because we don't have to do it with West Systems, that more rubbery stuff they use on boats. It has to be exactly where
Perfect.
you want it. You can't shape it. And that doesn't work very well for old houses and buildings. You got a molding profile. You know, you got to get it in there. You got a certain amount of time to get it exactly right on a Roman OG or something. It's tough. It's easier to shape it afterwards. All right, go ahead and fill up your, smear it into that hole.
Oh, that hole goes all the way through.
Avery, you want to go ahead and start curing that one while we're doing that? Who wants to fill this other one?
Who wants to mush it before?
Who wants to
Like,
mush it?
it's kind of like silly putty.
I know. Oh, love.
So it'll be in your hand. Listen, if you get a big ball of it in your hand that you can't get rid of before it starts to cure up, it'll get so hot in your hand you can't hold it.
So you'll
from the
know it's
center out.
curing.
Oh, yeah.
It's really bizarre. You like squeeze it and go, God, it's hard in the middle. You know, maybe you can use some on the outside, but then you're almost done. And so Avery's about 4 inches away. He's got it on medium high, and he's just going to stay on it till it's cured. And sometimes that can take 10 minutes, sometimes it can take 20. The thicker it is, the faster it happens. It can cure overnight just fine. But it really takes till the next day.
Okay.
And so ultimately, if we've got a whole bunch of windows that we're doing in the shop, and we got a little rot we're filling, we'll set them off to the side. We don't have to. But in classes, this is how I do it, so you can get a chance to shape it. And it really works that way. It's very important to have people be able to do things with their hands. So this is an example of a railing in a way you should never do it.
Yeah, that's what I said.
It's got a bevel, but it's flat on the top. And they've nailed directly into the balusters through the top. It's not a very good design. But it's holding the porch up and keeping people from falling off the porch, so that's half the battle. Right? So this is a crack that I would see as a candidate for filling. So what I did is I took the utility knife and I back cut it up and I back cut it down, so I create a little dovetail in there. Does that make sense? So this is the caulk that I use. And I get it in brown because most wood is brown and the house is white, so this will have a brown streak in it. But this is acrylic latex, and it's paintable, and it's unsanded caulk. You can get sanded caulk that actually has sand in it too if you've got a really tough texture that you're trying to match up. The idea is that we don't want to do something that's going to be shiny in after you paint it, and it's not going to look at the same texture. So I'll take some blue tape like this, and I'll put it on each side of the crack, because my goal is not to get it anywhere but in the crack. Okay, so you can buy this stuff at Lowe's, but you have to be careful not to buy. They sell shower caulking that's pure silicone that looks similar to this, and you got to make sure you look at it. This is acrylic latex.
So you don't want any silicone.
Well, a molecule of silicone and caulking can be a good thing, and it can be paintable, but pure silicone caulk, which it will never hold paint. It's just not something we'll do. And I'm not sure whether this is going to have to get poked or not.
What is it? Water-based caulk?
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be poked.
Well, it depends. You're
It'll
right.
have a
But
poke-
this is
it'll have a
shower caulk.
They'll have a poker right on it,
No.
won't it? Oh. Sure, they could use it.
Sometimes they get that little thing, and all you gotta do is pop it with honey.
99% of the time you don't have to poke anything that's acrylic. It's got what?
It's got it.
I'll talk about the gun.
Oh, yeah. You don't want a big hole, you want it to be fairly small. There we go. Oh, I poked through something.
Did you poke through something?
That's weird, isn't it? Okay.
train.
I do that just because it keeps the majority of the caulk off the rest of it. And then I do this one more time. And once that sets up, that'll take care of that crack and you won't be getting water. It's pretty simple. Could you run on that table? There's some tubes of caulking called Alex Plus. So that's that caulk. Now, what we're going to replace. So here we have a piece that's just too sucked in. We've got to replace this piece. And I want you to notice the caulk job on this. So we're, this would not be an adequate way to caulk something. If everybody can see that all right, that's like, what? You know, I mean, look at that. It's not good at all. Now the good news is here, you see, it's not all shiny. And that's what ends up happening with so many caulks like this. It's just shiny. And it's such a smooth texture that when you put the paint on, the crack will show, and that's what we don't want it to look like it has measles or you know, wrinkles, stuff like that. A couple things. You don't always get lucky enough to have a short run like this. It wouldn't make any sense. This crack's all the way. It's got a crack here. It's got a crack here. It's already getting a crack right here. It's all the way from this casing to this outside trim piece. So we just replaced that whole piece. But if you had a long run and everything was pretty good except for a section, then you might not want to take it all off, and you might want to do it. And the way we would do that is is take a adjustable square, get it so it comes up, and then bring it down just a hair, lock it in nice and tight, get a good one. This one's I think a Swanson. No, this is an Empire. This is a good one. And you'll notice where the nails are. Since there's apparently no sub-sheathing underneath here, they have nailed into the studs, right? So you take a utility knife, and you come up here, and you score this straight on, lightly to start with.
Are you just replacing part of that board?
No, we're going to do. I'm just showing you what you would do if you had a long run.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and then you can try to cut through it with a utility knife, but actually using one of these is probably the simplest thing to do.
Those are wonderful.
Yeah. And this has a carbide blade in it, so it'll cut nails like crazy. But it'll also do a nice job. What's interesting about these, so if I was going to keep this side of the board and get rid of this side of the board, would I do a straight cut or would I back bevel it? If I'm keeping this one, I'm coming in. I don't know if you can all see this or not. I put my thumb right back here, like that. You make as straight a line as you possibly can. And then you can come over, and so we're going to keep this one, and we're going to get rid of this one. So you want to try to get a little bite underneath there, pull this out, take this one off.
The insulation.
Yeah. So the next thing we have to do is we've got it should be nailed. See, it's nailed up too high. That's too high above the bottom edge. You want to be about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch from the bottom of the clapboard, and that's nailed about 1 1/4 inches, which is substantially more than what I would nail it. The good news is that with this tool, come up underneath here and cut that nail. We're going to turn this blade around so it does something a little bit different. So we can get it in there flat. This is called a fine multi-tool.
That's fine.
Now we've got to come up here. We've got a nail right here. We've got a nail right here. And that's how you do it without busting up a piece of bubble. Alright, so I'm just going to take a little of this caulk off this edge here so I can get this sucker in there nice and snug. What do you have to do to get rid of this board? Start out in the bottom, get these cut. And then if you just let it travel, and just kind of move it so that it slips up underneath there instead of cutting into the wood. Cut out these nails, and then you're going to have to cut these off as well. So whoever wants to try it.
I do.
There's one there. So start there. So yeah, you want it flat.
Flat.
Turn it on.
Turn on.
Turn it on before you take it out. Another way to do this is to pry the board away, and sometimes the nail will come out with it and then tap it back in. And sometimes you can get on the nail head with a hammer that way. I want a real hammer. So our reveals here, that's how much of the clapboard shows. This is about 4.5 inches 4 3/8. This one is about 4 1/2. This one is 4 3/8. And this one's 4. Okay, so 4 3/8 is our reveal. And we've got a rough side and a smooth side. This is smooth clapboard, so we're gonna get this in here like this. Exactly right there.
It's like, no, it sticks out. It's like, come on, keep going.
The same thing.
Don't they?
I was using. I got a couple of old pieces
That's what I had, yeah.
that I keep around when I see something.
Right.
And I probably got those off of Greg's trash pile when he was down here.
Oh, right, they had all this great stuff.
Yeah. For a piece of something. Oh,
You can do it a couple different ways. If you're gonna use a box nail, what I like to do before I pound it in is I like to blunt it. I want to blunt the end so it doesn't split through the wood. You don't want to go much deeper than that. This is another reason I don't like headed nails, because what it does is to get it sort of flush like they're supposed to be according to Hoyle, it also breaks the wood fibers around the nail head. Right? So for me, it's better to use a finish nail like this, coming out the bottom, with a finish head on it like this.
Okay.
And hi Avery. Blunt the end of it. That's who my name.
Okay, I'm writing it
I'm kidding, man.
Serious.
So I'm coming up about a half inch, a little over a half of an inch from the bottom, and I've got a really solid. I don't know. This one feels goosey. So I'm going into this one.
Or not.
That was interesting, wasn't it?
Or else you hit the seam.
that's what I'm thinking.
I'm serious about blunting these. Because cedar is very vulnerable to cracking. Alright, so now, if I do it with a finish nail, I set it below the surface about 1/8 of an inch. And after I prime, then I come in and I fill it with glazing putty, and it's ready to go. The other way to do this, of course, is with this guy. And so you can come in here like this. Oh, I guess I better push the battery in. Gotta give it one cycle. I'm hungry. And that does a really nice job, and it sets it for you so you can come back in and do that. And it's almost virtually the same size nail.
Awesome.
And this is a great tool. These are not cheap. These are $400. And this is brand new. I bought it Thursday because Jose dropped mine from the 3rd story, and then packed it all back in the box and brought it over to and put it back on the rack and never told me. You need somebody to get a measurement on this, and give the measurement to Avery, and get that next piece cut, because I'm not doing it for you.
Oh,
It's good.
See how they are? I have to pick somebody. Okay. That's about what we were. So while he's doing that, then remember we cut the nails up here, and they've got all these little finish nails in here, which are interesting. But this is so high. It's so much higher than it needs to be.
The nail is higher up.
Yeah, see how
than the
high
half
this
inch.
is?
Yeah.
You want to be 1/2 to 3/4 max from the bottom. That's hitting the, because you've got pieces overlap. If you come up, so this piece of siding is right to about here.
Yeah, you're missing.
And so it's a hollow spot there, and when
Yeah.
you nail it in above the clapboard, it can crack it or what have you. So it's really important not to be up that high. And all of this was nailed too high. Look at this. This is way up there.
Must have been a very special.
Right. One thing when Avery came to apply for the job, I always.
And so I had
Now you want
a bunch
to,
of shake shingles.
bring it down a little closer there.
Let's see if I can
Now, it depends. If the nails didn't get cut up flush, sometimes that could be an issue. But that can be an issue right there. Like nasty old goobers.
Yeah.
A rag and lay it down. Okay, so as I take here, you're gonna need this 5 3/8 is what you're after for a reveal.
5 3/8. Okay.
On this particular
It's gonna
house, so this
vary
is
from
what's
house to
called
house.
6-inch clapboard.
Okay.
And it's actually closer to 5 1/2, 5 5/8, because nothing is actually what they say it is.
Yep.
Shoot.
The old one. I'm like,
That's right. Now let's try one with a regular nail. So let's go with a finish nail, which is here, and then you can blunt it here.
oh, like a machine gun.
Well, in historic preservation, can everybody hear me? In historic preservation, getting away from hammers as much as possible is good, because hammers cause a lot of vibrations to historic materials. So these nail guns really have changed our lives in so many ways. And they're all hot dip galvanized.
those shake shingles. And I had taken 1 or 2 of these down.
The way to caulk is to get your tip like this. Come in here like this. I'm going to get the caulk down in there. And then sometimes if you need to, you can wet your finger. Just go like that.
Oh. I need to do that on my car.
And you've got
On the windshield.
Oh, God.
Because it leaks.
it's just simple, you know?
Be careful not to lick your finger too many times.
Yeah.
Well, they make marshmallow flavored.
Well, we have through a lot today. And actually, I've shown you just about everything I need to show you, unless there's something that you think I've missed for the exterior side. Certainly, if you have other questions, I'm interested in hearing them.
Isn't it true that you never caulk at the bottom of your flat boards?
This is a question I get all the time.
And I knew.
It's a good question, and you know the answer, but you never caulk the bottom of a flat board, ever. You only caulk the end grain where it meets something like a piece of trim or door casing, and you don't put gigantic bubbles like that in it that didn't even adhere. It's just craziness, you know. Caulking's not that hard. It's all about the pressure on the gun and trying to, to get just the amount you need, wetting your finger if you need to, and wiping it down so that it disappears. That's the whole point. The reason is that that has to breathe. So when moisture gets in the wall, it has to escape. And in fact, in really humid areas, there are these little tiny shims that you can put up underneath the siding to make sure that there's a gap here after painting. So that, but the other side of it is most clapboard is laid over sheathing of some sort. Usually 1x6, lap boards or tongue and groove boards that are laid along the wall original. And I will take off siding, and what do I find underneath the siding on top of the sheathing? What do you think? The sheathing board, tar paper. So Tyvek, you've all seen Tyvek, right? Because they'll start doing a rehab or they're building the house, and the Tyvek will be up for 6 months before they ever get around to it, right? So Tyvek's warranty is void after being up in UV light for 60 days. The UV light breaks it down, and we've seen it up for a long time, and then they'll side over it and come back later and pull it off, and the Tyvek is just dust behind it. The UV light has trashed it.
Wow.
Now that's a building wrap. Tar paper's been around a long time, and I'll take off siding that was put on in 1890, and it's still got the tar paper under it and still in good shape, and I don't even have to put a new piece on. There's not a lot of vapor permeability in tar paper, but there is some. It is not waterproof. you can't put it on a roof and hope that it will stay waterproof. It just won't. But it's I've actually seen red rosin paper as a building paper before. Now, I see it underneath floors all the time. Whenever we lay flooring on top of subfloor, we lay red rosin paper all over the subfloor, and that stops any air infiltration from the basement or what have you, and that works out really, really well. Yeah, you definitely don't caulk the bottom edge of the clapboard, but you definitely need to caulk all of the vertical areas. All the cascading water that can get into your house, you want to caulk everything that it can get into and nothing that it can't. So this window probably never had a drip cap on the top, but that's a piece of wood. You still have that piece here?
Yeah.
Will you go grab it? Oh, that's a great prop. So a drip cap would be up on top of here, so as water came down, it would drip away from the window. And usually, you'll see on later houses, there'll be your sill beam is underneath here, and you've got a trim board over it, and then you've got a drip cap that sticks out, so as water comes down, it drips away from the house. So, as water's coming down this siding, would we always caulk this joint?
Yeah.
Yeah, because water can get in it. Water can't get up underneath here, right? So we never caulk that joint. If we have it here. So this is a drip ledge. These are easy to make. This comes up underneath, so the siding comes down over the top of this. And it would be, you know, somewhere in this area usually. And the only thing this one's missing, and it's at an angle so the water can drip off, is a saw kerf right down the middle, right not in from the edge about 1/4 of an inch. Doesn't have to be very deep, it can be 1/8 of an inch. But what happens then is the water rolls down the drip cap, comes around here, it hits that kerf and drips down instead of coming back into the house. And on stone sills, you will see that kerf almost every single time. On my little Greek Revival Scoundrels house behind our big house, every wooden sill originally had those little drip kerfs in them, which works out great. Now these can also go, these are usually a little thinner, they go on top of a window, but you can see why. So as water's coming down here, would you caulk this if it didn't have a drip cap right up here?
No.
Yeah, you would. But if it had drip cap, you wouldn't have to, because this little ledge goes up underneath the siding. I can almost pull that siding away enough to
And show it.
do that. Yep. So that goes up underneath there like that, see? And so the water comes down here, it can't get back up in there, so you wouldn't caulk that joint either. So it's basically whatever cascading water can get into is what you caulk, and you should use cases of caulk when you paint your house and you caulk your house, because that's what's going to stop a lot of the air infiltration as well as the water itself.
Where exactly for the sill? Where would you?
Well, on this house,
If this one doesn't have
it doesn't have a sill, so it's probably got a sill plate or a beam in here. Generally, you know, maybe a 9x9 sill beam, or it might just be a 2x plate. But normally there'd be a trim board here, and this would sit about this height, come up on top of that trim board, and then the water would drip off that way.
Okay.
That make sense?
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm so glad you brought that. Now that's about the angle that I do scarf joints, not a 45, because you can never glue end grain to anything. End grain to edge grain, end grain to face grain, end grain to end grain, you can't glue it. Because wood has veins. They're called xylem tubes. And that's what brings the nutrients up through the tree and up into the upper parts of the tree. And so that's what shows on the end grain. And if you take a magnifying glass on some woods and a microscope on others and you look at the end grain, you can see all these little tubes. And that's why end grain is so vulnerable, why we double prime it a lot, you know, to really make sure that we're sealing it up. But that's another problem. So on that fir porch flooring, those 4 samples that I passed around, I have a lot of colleagues that are doing something that's really damaging. And that is that they're taking the end grain, because it seems like it rots the most on the end of the boards, and they're soaking it with a liquid epoxy.
And that had holes.
Well, that's a prescription for it to rot even more, because as the water's rolling off a porch and coming off the end onto the ground, if you have sealed the end as the water's soaking into the wood, it has no place. It wants to come out the end grain. That's where it evaporates the most, out the end grain. And so, if you seal the end grain so much that it has no vapor permeability, it'll rot it more. So we usually double prime, oil prime the end grains. That still has some vapor permeability, but keeps a lot of the moisture out. You can also, if you have your porch floor come out enough, you can take a router and run a kerf underneath it, so you've got that drip kerf underneath the porch edge as well, so the water doesn't roll back to your framing or your trim boards.
How is that board mounted?
Right.
It's just nailed in. So you've got a
Nailed from the
you got a
bottom,
3/4 inch trim board. Let's here. So this is backwards, but this is sitting on top. This is horizontal, and it gets nailed at an angle into this trim board
from the bottom.
from the top, and then the siding comes over and covers the nail hole.
Right.
And there's nothing down, this is solid.
Yeah. So this is even more brilliant. So now we have a trough in here for water to like soak in and soak the ends and rot at the ends. I've seen boards, individual boards put on here with a gap down here. And I've seen even the blocking, if it wasn't put in too tight, the water can get down and come through. But this is actually one piece that's been rabbited on the top for that to go down into. And that is brilliant.
Okay, I've got a fence like this. Should I drill holes in the bottom?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I would. Anytime so when I do porch columns, I don't do this. I have treated lumber coming off of a pier footing that's way below frost line. My footing below the sonotube that we use, the cardboard tubes, is usually about 18 to 24 inches in diameter, and usually 6 to 9 inches thick, filled with rebar. Pieces of rebar put down into that come up, they're hooked, that go into that footing and come up to the top of the cardboard tube. So I've got 3 or 4 of those in there. And then after that cures, we pour the tube footing. It's like a foot. So if I didn't have a foot, I would just be walking around on stumps and I'd be falling over, and I'd be going down into the ground. And a footing is literally to keep that from sagging. I dig my footing. Avery's getting ready to dig a whole bunch of them because we're building a big pavilion in the yard and putting a missing porch on. And I am so anal about this that we dig down. Our frost line is 36 inches. Is that about what yours is here?
I don't know.
30? Ours is 32.
Yeah.
In Des Moines, it was 48. In Minneapolis, it's like damn near 60 inches. So we dig down for the big footing to pour first, and we take a tamper and tamp all of the bottom of the hole so there's nothing loose down there. So we have a solid base for that footing to sit on so it won't move on us. That's the key. And I just see these guys taking post hole diggers or augers, and they just put the post down in the ground, pour some concrete around it, or they're pouring a sonotube, a cardboard tube, and it's without a footing. And they don't, with all this rubble down at the bottom, and they're not, either vibrating it or tamping it with a stick down in there to get all the air pockets out and that kind of thing. And it can cause a lot of problems. My porches last a long time because I overbuild my footings. I'd rather overbuild it than underbuild it, and I think that's important because there's a lot of weight that especially comes out on the outside corners of these with a hip roof on the top. The ceilings on our porches are 12 feet tall, just like the ceilings inside the house, and then you've got a lot of weight. And we're doing rubberoid, 60 mil EPDM roofing material and copper flashings and all kinds of things like that.
Do you ever use the plastic bell footings?
I've not used them. Have you tried them out?
Yeah.
How do you like them?
Well, the guys digging the holes didn't like them.
No, I bet they did.
But
Tell them what you're talking about.
there's a plastic form. It's 32. You get it. It's 28, 32, 18 inches. And if you have a single-story deck, you can use the 18 inches. If you have 2-story and a roof and all that, you have to go to 32. and they have a neck on them that'll come up and replace your sonic tube. Even if you bury them deeper because of the frost line, you can put the sonic tube around the outside of that bell tube.
So it makes a bell
To bring it
footing
up.
like that,
Oh,
which
okay.
really spreads the weight out
Okay,
nicely
so
without as much concrete to be
And
used.
you don't have to rebar it because it's contained in that bell. And then you put your post caps on your J-bar, which is the angle bar, or you can bring your J-bar up and have it just threaded, and then screw your post
So
bases to that.
it's kind of a J bolt, so it's L-shaped. It's threaded on the top, and we set it down into the wet concrete,
It won't
and
go anywhere.
and it won't go. And then we put what's called a post anchor, and there are all kinds of them. I use one that gets on there and gets bolted down. It's all stainless steel, and it keeps the wood off the concrete. And they're rated for, Simpson's makes them. Simpson is the biggest maker of like joist hangers, post anchors, stuff like that. The rating on the weight ratings are just off the Richter scale. I've never even come close to calculating out the weight of anything that would smash one of them. So
Yeah, we used to spot weld that bolt after we tightened it down, and then cut the J bolt off. And that way our cap that goes on top of it,
Right.
for the top side of it, was always right flush and down on the concrete,
Right.
so it didn't have it wasn't being held up by a bolt.
Right.
So-
That's exactly right. That's exactly the way to do it. It's not rocket science, but nonetheless, it's important to do things well. It's 100 grit outside. We never sand any wood or epoxy over 100 grit because we need the paint and the primer to have something to grab onto. Now I change up my position because if you come in and look at this, what happens if you come in and look at this.
He's literally.
Done it to me about it twice.
Is if I just go straight like this, I start to get what we call chatter marks, little cross pieces, right? So if I change up my direction like this, and you can see these shavings are almost like wood. It's amazing. You want to try this? Who wants to try this? Somebody, get your hands on it. That's what is important. I'm gonna go with, yeah. So, yeah. I know, it shapes really nice. Here, you want everybody try. The thing that I would say probably what, Avery, 70-80% of the time, 70 or 80% of the time, we use carbide scrapers to shape it down. And so much of this is about hand tools, So that scraper is essentially what I was not allowed to use sandpaper in my apprenticeship on anything.
Right.
We use cabinet scrapers, and we put a burr on the edge, and that's what this carbide scraper is the equivalent of today. I mean, they're really sharp, and
Cool.
you see that? Isn't that nice?
Yeah. Anyone else?
Can they be sharpened?
Yes.
Really?
So they're two-sided. I can get one sharpening out of them, and it costs me about $2.50 to get both sides sharpened, and the blades cost $8 to $10 a piece. Now, once they sharpen it too much, then it's too short beyond this. But so I come on here like this. You can put a straight edge across there so you don't get it too shallow. And we're trying to keep it only on the area that we're trying to fill. See how I use two hands so I can control all my tools. I think it's really critical to do that. If people say, well, you've been doing this all your life, how come you're using? Because I can control the tool. Okay, now feel that. Pretty good, huh?
Yep, great.
All right, Avery, you want to show them how it sands up? Still a hair proud. He's almost there. Now feel that. Touch, feel, smell. Smell it, actually. And that was recessed almost a quarter of an inch in that area. In England, back during the 1800s, masons, brick firing got more precise.
I know, I'm sorry.
You could
I'm
make
gonna
very
get out of your
uniform
way.
bricks. And the masons were, multi-generational in Europe. And they did what we call in this country butter joints, like butter, a stick of butter. And they're like 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch joints. They're really tiny. And it takes really uniform brick and very good mason to be able to get that small of a joint. So in England, where they were doing this all the time, the working people in their houses are like, well, shit, how come we can't have butter joints? And the masons are like, you can't afford the extra brick, and the cost, and the time, but we can get you butter joints. So what we're going to do is we're going to take your crappy brick, and we're going to have big old 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch joints. And we're going to color the mortar the same color as the brick. And then we're going to tuck point it. We're going to take and put a little line down the middle. And we're going to put it in colored mortar into that
Oh
little.
my God.
That's what tuck pointing. Tuck pointing
It's
has
like faux
nothing to
painting.
do with removing mortar and putting new mortar in. Now, it's been co-opted, so everybody calls it tuck pointing, but it's called repointing. You're repointing something. Pointing is mortar, putting mortar in, and you're repointing because you've got deteriorated mortar. I have never repointed an entire building in my life.
Would you like to?
No.
No, because that means the building.
There is no need to. Your building, I'm sure, doesn't need to be. The reason that entire buildings get repointed all the way around is because they don't know how to match mortar. And we saw that building yesterday next to where, was it the building we were working on? No, it was next to it. That's some of the worst repointing work I've seen in years. They use type N mortar. Type N, which has some lime and lots of Portland cement.
It'll crack
Yeah,
the
bust
brick.
Case of the brick. on that.
So it's really important that the mortar always be softer than the masonry that you're repointing. And the easiest way to do it is to take a sample and send it to David Arbogast in Bettendorf, Iowa. He takes it into his nerdy little laboratory down in his ranch basement, and he
Bangs it with a hammer.
a whole bunch of things and acids, but he separates out everything. He tells me exactly what kind of lime and how much lime. He separates out all the sand into a bag, so I can go out to the sand place and get river sand. It's got old mortar had to come from sand that was in some sort of riverbed because it's round, and the sharp mortar gives a whole different texture, and it actually doesn't work as well with lime as river rock. So the sand that I use at my house that he took out of the samples has lots of little rocks in it, little what we call aggregates and things like that. And out at the sand place, the Compa families own the same sand place since the 1850s, same family. They've got piles that have been there that long.
Where is that sand place?
Bly. So I'm able to go out and take that little bag of sand and find the right sand. And I know which pile it is now. It's presumably gone. But so it's really important to do that. And you also have to think of a masonry unit like this, a brick, a stone, like a piece of French bread. So what's the most obvious attribute of a piece of French bread?
Irregular and
Well, and it's got a kind of a hard crust
made of spread.
and creamy on the inside, made of bread. That's good. Yeah. I like it.
So a brick, made of brick.
So if you take a piece of French bread and put a little olive oil on it and put it out in a light rain, it'll survive. If you take the crust off the French bread and put it in a light rain, it turns into mush. That's why we don't power wash brick, old brick, and we don't any brick, and especially old brick, and we don't sandblast any of that stuff. Because if we do, we're taking the crust off the
Yeah.
French bread, and the brick will deteriorate right away.
Yeah.
Con holes also take
It's too abrasive.
too abrasive.
It's just too abrasive.
Yeah, I heard of
Yeah.
Many people have tried to tell me, we use con holes.
that. Right, I read all
Or,
that
or
too.
walnut shells.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
or
yeah.
bead blasting,
Still too-
you
Right.
know, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And it's just too aggressive. You know, if you've got a masonry building and it looks dirty, you gotta clean it with some Dawn and a scrub brush. I'm serious. And then try sodium phosphate. And then if it's just got all this environmental crud on it and you can't get it off, go to Cathedral Stone in Kansas City, and they handle all these really good masonry cleaning products. But you always start with the lowest first, which is water, then water and Dawn, you know, and then work your way up. But if you want your brick building to look new, you need to like turn around and go out to the cornfield development and buy a snout house. That's a house where the most redeeming architectural feature is a 3-car garage on the front, because that's where you need to live. If you want everything in your old house to look new, why would you buy an old house? I mean, you know, the character is important. So if you have your brick looks dirty, clean it a little bit, but it doesn't have to look brand new. And repointing an entire building is just lazy tuck pointers who don't know what they're doing, and they don't know how to match mortar. I've never repointed any building that I've, brick building or stone building, the entire repointing, and I've never used a grinder, not once, except for one exception. A very thin blade to cut out high Portland cement, go down the middle of the joint very carefully to get that crap out of there before it ruins the brick.
Right.
But we actually tool out the joints with screwdrivers.
Oh, thank you.
And
Use a hammer or just
no,
your hand?
I mean, if I have to use a hammer on the mortar, then I don't need to be taking it out,
It needs to stay in there.
right? And the back of a joint is kind of interesting. So if you look at a brick, we always go back when we're cleaning out the mortar 2.5 times the width of the joint. So if you got a 1/4-inch joint, how far back do you need to tool the mortar out? Yep, about 3/4 of an inch, an inch at the most, and it has to have a flat back. So if you take a grinder, you're going to end up with this in the back. And that might seem, and it did to me too, on the surface, that might be okay, because then the mortar would lock in there.
Right.
But all the research shows that the flat back is better. And then we missed the joint lightly before we put the mortar in. And why would we do that? This goes back to the same thing we've talked
So
about.
it doesn't dry too quickly.
Right, so if we don't miss the joint, the masonry is going to suck the moisture out of the mortar too quickly, and it's going to cure wrong, and it's going to shrink, and it's not going to sit.
Can you use bonding agent or do you need to use water?
Nah, you don't need to, just water, that's it.
It'll bond it.
Oh yeah, it'll bond just beautifully. So I have pneumatic chisels as well that sometimes we use to get hard Portland cement out with, but you have to be really good with them. On that house next door to the one we did, you can see where they came off on the face with the grinders. They made the joints probably double the width they originally were, and it just looked terrible. Plus, it doesn't pass the fingernail test. If you can take your fingernail and score a line into the mortar, and I'm not just talking about just like the residue of your fingernail, but actually score a line into it, it's too hard. You need to be able to score a line into it. And you can tell on the original mortar, when you do it, it looks fine, but if you start hacking on it, it's going to come out. Leave it alone. Lime is the expansion joint. If you look at new construction, they have these hard-fired bricks, and they have to have these big expansion joints, and they fill them with butyl caulk all the way up and down, because the mortar and the bricks don't contract and expand. They're so hard, right? But the wall is going to, so they have to put in these joints. Lime is sticky, and so as the brick lets out moisture and shrinks, the lime moves with it, and then it compresses, and it moves with it, and compresses. And so that's really important. That's one of the things John Spiewijk, who's doing this class for me, does it every 2 years, so it's pretty rare that he's doing it. What I love about John and all the instructors that I teach 80% of the classes, but is that they talk about the why to as much as the how to. What's the science behind it? Why do we need to do it this way? It's not good enough to just say, do it. He explains exactly why. And that's what good teachers do.
I believe a good teacher. Thank you very much.
I think unless you have other questions, we can call it a day. But I found out 2 cedar roofs that I put on were taken off because they turned gray. With 20 years on them. They're 60-year roof. And one of them was on a Gothic revival that would have lasted 80 years. And the roofer comes to the door and says, your roof is gray, it's going to start leaking, you better get it off now. And they tore off these beautiful cedar shingles. One of the things that we look for is what's called a #1 blue label cedar shingle. Whether it's sidewalls, they have #2 red label for sidewalls, but don't use them because they're not vertical grain quarter sawn. You want complete heart, no sapwood, straight grain, quarter sawn or vertical grain. And I usually use sometimes I use an 18-inch, sometimes I use a 28-inch, and they're sawn. They're thick on the ends, actually the 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch, and you can get them real thin, but you want the ones that are really thick on the blunt.
I think mine are thick.
And
They're moving though.
and if you lay those shingles on sheeting, you've got about a 15-year roof. If you lay them on spaced decking, which is the boards with the gaps between them, you've got a 50 to 80-year roof.
I knew that, and I saw the guy put sheeting on mine, and I knew it. I didn't own it at the time, so.
Yeah, it's a big mistake a lot of people make. The Park Service made the mistake up in the national forests. And now they're taking all of them off and going back to skip decking because lets air flow underneath to dry them out quicker and on top.
Right.
And that, and some codes won't let you do it. So
Right.
it's not, the international codes leave a certain amount of discretion to the local code official. And, they're like, well, it's a fire hazard. Well, okay. So the plywood is, the 1/2-inch plywood is a burn rate of about, 20 minutes, if you're lucky. But I think rating-wise, that's what it is. 3/4-inch plywood ups it a little bit. But there hasn't been a roof fire in the Midwest since we quit using coal, so I'm not too worried about it. And I had somebody say, well, my insurance company won't insure my house with a cedar roof. I'm like, bullshit. I've been with State Farm since I was 16 years old, and they've insured every rehab house during the process, all my houses at the end, cedar shingled roofs, you name it, everything that doesn't seem to be how they do things today, and they've come out and inspected. I've never had them ever deny my insurance. Now, I don't know whether that's because I've been with them since I was 16, but insurance shouldn't be an issue because we don't use coal anymore. Now, some people burn wood in their fireplaces and some ashes could get on it, I suppose. You have to start loading her up, dude.
What's the space between on skip deck? What's the space they normally use? 2 inches between?
2 inches.
2 inches.
On a 1x6. Yeah. So, but think about it. Once you lay a roof, you've got, let's say you got a standard 5-inch reveal, 5 inches of shingle. You do a double course at the beginning, and then every 5 inches you're putting another row. By the time you get all the shingles on, you have so many layers of cedar per square inch that it's never going to soak through, unless it's on plywood. And then it will, and it'll never dry out from underneath, and they rot from the underneath side out. Is that what's on your school?
Yeah, and the guy who I bought it from was a contractor and came and gutted it and did everything, put the new roof, and the realtor's like, it's an $18,000 roof and da-da-da, and I'm like, yeah, but and I had already researched, cedar roofs and how they need to breathe and this and that, and I asked the guy I bought it from, he's like, yeah, I put down the sheathing and a vapor barrier, and I was like, it's a $20,000 roof. I'm like, yeah, but you did it wrong.
So to insulate attics, half stories, or, within the roof line, Benjamin Obdyke, which is a company that makes construction materials, came out with this cedar breather. And it's a matrix of plastic about this thick with little strands so the air can move under it. So so the Park Service bought into this right away, put on sheathing, solid plywood sheathing, and then put this cedar breather on it. And the roof's rotted away in 16 years instead of 15 because it's just that much space. And it's just not enough airflow underneath the shingles to keep them dry. You know, an unfinished attic space has nice airflow and it's dry up there and it helps dry things out really quickly. So it's a big mistake a lot of people make. And the other thing that drives me nuts about roofing is, you know, if some guy shows up to my job site that was interested in giving me a bid on the roof and he's got a bucket of blackjack tar in the back of his truck, I very kindly put my foot on his ass and kick him off my property, because the truth of it is that blackjack is not flashing. We don't use tar and caulk for flashing. I just took a consulting job in Joplin, Missouri, and two great big robber baron mansions take up an entire half a block. They take up the whole block on the front. And they had burned, and there was tornado damage from the big tornado that went through there. And the guy that owns the largest asphalt shingle company in the world, Pamco, is from there. You know, big money, right? He bought them to turn them into museum houses and created this not-for-profit. And what's interesting is that they hired Renaissance Roofing out of Belvedere, Illinois, which is up in northern Illinois. Renaissance Roofing is one of the best roofing companies I've ever worked with in my life. They do slate, clay tile. They have copper guys and women in their shop that are just an amazing level of expertise. They just clad this entire clock tower that I managed the whole project on with 20-ounce copper and all the OGs and brackets, and they had all this, you know, brake machines and all these things they could do all this work with. And they did this slate roof on these two houses, and I was up on the roof 2 weeks ago. And the counter flashing, so you have flashing that comes underneath the shingles that comes up, that's called flashing. And then you have counter flashing that comes down over it so the water can't get behind the metal flashing. They had caulked it into the mortar joints on the chimney. I worked with Renaissance for 30 years. I had never seen them do this. Well, they got jammed up and they hired a crew from down in Texas to come up that had some slate experience, and they caulked it all in. So I called Renaissance. I said, "You got 1 week to get out here because we're not paying you." They hired me to be the enforcer to come in and do all this stuff. The architect's a wonderful guy, Michael Griffin. I love him to death, but he's kind of a nerd, and he's sort of afraid of these rough and tumble contractor guys, right? So they were out there in 3 days, and they took all that caulk out and they mortared that in the way that it should have been, the counter flashing into the chimneys. Caulk and tar are not flashing. And termination bars are the thing that really torque me. You'll see these aluminum bars on the counter flashing coming down, or the top of the flashing that comes up with no counter flashing. It's got a little rubber back on a little EPDM back, and they screw it into the masonry. Those things leak within the first couple of years as the EPDM starts to shrink and things are contracting and expanding. It's totally unlike. There's so many different elements to a house, but the roof and the foundation are where you have to start. You really have to take a look at your house.
So how do you feel about my kitchen? I know there's the original hardwood, there's the linoleum, and then there's the new
So what's the question?
Is that okay?
Is what okay?
Leaving the linoleum down.
Yeah, it encapsulates it. A lot of that old inlaid squares of linoleum and asbestos. And they quit using asbestos in them in about 1980.
I think it's vinyl. It's a vinyl, sheet vinyl.
On top of
On top of
the wood floor.
Oh, on top of the wood
and
floor.
then they put a floating, I think it's a floating
Yes.
vinyl floor on top of it.
Yes.
Yeah. If you like it,
Well,
great. Just hope you don't have a kitchen plate.
Not planned, it's already done. But it did save, the linoleum being there saved the hardwood because I had a leak that I couldn't find. It ended up being the dishwasher, but the linoleum had gone far enough back under the dishwasher that the floating floor was a few inches. This way, the water stayed. I had this water as I'm walking across the floor. It's and bubbling, and I'm, where is this coming from? And it took a couple months to figure it out. And it just, as soon as I figured it out and shut off the water supply to the dishwasher,
Well,
thought,
good.
oh,
So
it's
it's encapsulated
saved-
the old
it's
wood
saved
floor,
it.
and somebody can
It
come along
saved the
later and
floor.
save it. You know, I walked into our kitchen one day, and we've had Newfoundlands for years.
I love
And
it.
Gracie was a 140-pound female.
Oh,
And when that dog pees,
yeah.
so they had her on some sort of steroids for a skin thing,
Oh dear.
which makes them, So I walk in the kitchen and it's flooded, and I'm like, God, Gracie
Oh,
peed in the
Lord.
kitchen.
Oh no.
That isn't what it was.
Oh.
The filter in the water dispenser in the refrigerator had blown up inside the refrigerator.
Oh, wow.
And water was just pouring out. It was a faulty filter. And actually, the company, Culligan, that made these filters, paid for all the damage. I didn't have to sue them or anything. I just called them up and I said, yep, that was a faulty batch. We tried to stop them. We got into about 5 Lowe's stores. We'll take care of it, Mr. Yap. Cool. I don't have to get on TV and trash you.
What are the metal tabs you see on these slate roofs that are pitched real high? You'll see the metal tabs in the last like 4 feet that are sticking up.
So those are ice dams. So that's to stop the snow and the ice from coming down really fast
And sliding
and
off.
sliding off, and like an avalanche. Slows it down, and they offset them here and there.
Right.
Sometimes you'll see copper tabs. That's usually where a cracked slate was, and they come back in, they slide the new slate up, but before they do, they attach 2 pieces of copper strapping, and then the slate goes up, it gets even with the others on each side, and then they bend the tab up over the top of it. And that's an acceptable way to repair slate as well. There was, what was
Question, have you ever restored a lightning rod?
but it's awful cool, isn't it? My house, the Belvedere, had one. And it's a little bit gone, but the original painting of the house that was done in 1860, right after they finished building it, shows this lightning rod. I keep thinking of Ben Franklin, because he's the guy that came up with the idea. And actually, they actually work. There's been some controversy over whether they're that effective or not, but they do draw, and then it's got a ground wire that goes down to the ground, so it doesn't like burn your house down. Right?
I don't think there's any homes
Just
in
don't
St.
stand
John that
near it.
have anymore.
You think some of them did?
Well, just a few years ago,
Water
there
coming
was
out
one
of
on
it.
8th Street,
14.2,
Really?
single piece
Yeah.
of
and they
the
put
wire out
vinyl
of
siding on
14.2.
it.
That's not even 12.
Like one of those-
So, how much photographic evidence of old buildings or old drawings or plat maps show existent buildings do you have?
We got Sanborn maps.
Yeah.
Maybe
20.
You don't have the 1885
I
Sanborn?
own one, I think 1883.
There's one right after 1884 or 1885, something like that. And that's the earliest one that I found in Missouri. And they're on the University of Missouri's website.
Oh.
Every city.
Yeah, they're all accessible.
Yeah, it's really great that they digitized all that stuff. It's the equivalent of an aerial photograph of your community. It shows your house from what would be, but they did it, I don't know how they accomplished it. But the bird's eye views of towns are what are really fascinating. So this guy came back from the Civil War between 1866 and 1872. He went all over the country with a crew of artists and did these bird's eye views of these towns. And some of them, Hannibal specifically, is so accurate that I assumed, a lot of us assumed until we started really digging into it, that they were doing this from hot air balloons. But so what they did is they came in, they figured the angle that they wanted to show the town. They got people up on roofs, artists up on roofs and buildings, and then they figured their angle of their little section. They drew or painted their little section, and then they handed it off to this guy, and he did the whole bird's eye view. And it's really interesting. So we have ours from 1869, which is 9 years after my house was built, but I'm still the biggest house in Hannibal in 1869, sitting there virtually by itself, which is really interesting to see. And you see all the downtown party wall buildings, and the river, and it shows all the river boats and the log rafts coming down. And, do you have one?
No, I don't think we have one of those.
So do a Google search on St. Genevieve bird's eye views, and you might be surprised because they did a lot of them on the Mississippi, up and down the Mississippi Valley. And that's early. 69 is pretty early. Sanborn maps are in the 80s when they began. So I can show. Now we have a lot of 1840s and 1850s plat maps in Hannibal that are hanging at the Mark Twain Museum, mostly in Henry Sweet's office upstairs. Henry was born in the basement of the museum. I'm kidding. But we all thought maybe he had been. He retired, but he won't leave. So he still has an office there. But he's got these plat maps, one from 1845, one from 1855. And it shows that church, that house I just bought across from us as the Hannibal Christian Church. So, interesting. All this research material. What other resources do you have for these folks?
As far as
Well, you know, you did this, and I want a round of applause for the city of St. Genevieve because, you know, here's the thing about preservation, is we can tell people you need to do this, you have to do that, we can mandate, but when you mandate without educating, it's not good. You have to give people the tools that they need to be able to do things, or at least understand how it should be done when they hire them, so that they can get things done. And so communities that bring me in, I'm always impressed that they understand this. And of course, you know, my colleague John Leake was here a few years ago, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that's ever come in here, but there's been other people. So there is an ethic there, and I think that's really important. Thank you all for having me. It's been a great day.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. I like it.
Where